Welcome back. So, opposition parties have welcomed the suspension of National Prosecuting Authority Gauteng South Director, Advocate Andrew Chauke. President Cyril Ramaphosa says this is pending the outcome of an inquiry into his fitness to hold office. It comes 2 years after NPA head Shamila Batohi asked him to do so for his alleged mishandling of high-profile cases. Well, we're going to get some reaction now with governance expert Professor Theo Fenter, as well as legal expert Mpumelelo Zigalala joining us via video link. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Such an interesting time to watch the various institutions of law enforcement in our country. And Prof, I'll let you go first. Just your initial thoughts at that announcement of the suspension of Advocate Andrew Chauke. Is this, as Anne Bernstein has called it, the right step in restoring public confidence in the NPA? Prof. Fenter, are you there?
Yes, sorry. For a moment, I waited for my colleague to respond. But
no, that one's for you.
Let me kick off. Yeah, I think everything that we see over the last 2 or 3 weeks were, in a sense, moved one step forward by the press conference of General Lucky Makwenazi, because a lot of these things were lingering. There was a case of General Johan Boysen. There was Zondo Commission that had hearings where Chauke was implicated. There were cases with Glennis Breitenbach where he was implicated. There was the case of General Ndluli where he was implicated, but somehow nothing happened. And I think in one of the words that Makwenazi used in his press conference, where he said, it seems as if there's a collusion between the police, organized crime, and then he said the branch of justice, or he indicated that somebody in the justice arena, and I think that initiated this whole thing where a 2-year... Now, we know that the president tend to, in the last 2 or 3 days, he has been very busy appointing and firing people, and Chauke is now one of them.
Yeah, very interesting. Mpumelelo, your views and initial reaction to that announcement?
I would say it has been a long time coming. And I think focus must then be focused on the president to say, why did you take long to act when the head of the NPA has requested you to act in accordance with what the NPA Act is saying? Between the time in which you've delayed, how many cases have been handled by the person in question? What is the harm that has taken place on those cases? Are we going to see the repeat of the same thing going on over and over again? And maybe another important question would be, are there any high-profile cases that fall within the group that are being investigated now, that had the president acted within the amount of time as per the request of the NPA head, all those would have been done and dusted, or would have avoided a situation where those cases, for lack of a better word, are being botched? So we need to focus and say, Mr. President, yes, we are doing a good job by focusing on what is required from you, but why are you taking so long to act when there are certain pertinent issues pertaining to the NPA that needs to be fixed well within time? But most importantly, what are you going to do to change your slow movement going further to make sure that you act within time when cases such as these ones appear on top of your desk?
Yeah, I wonder, Mpumelelo, and I'm going to stay with you for this, if you concur with the point that was made by Prof. Fenter, that we're seeing the speed, if you will, by the president as a result of that press briefing by Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi.
I think it can be attributed to it to a certain extent, to say maybe if the provincial commissioner did not come with hardcore evidence, because you see that it was not a normal press conference where one would listen to what the provincial commissioner is saying and end it there. There was a proper PowerPoint presentation with extracts of evidence that linked to whatever allegations was insinuating to. So he went to the press briefing to say, I know that I'm going to defend myself. I know that there are going to be insinuations that are there that I'm lying. So I want to provide as much credible evidence as there is. I would even assume that between the president and the provincial commissioner, probably there has been a meeting between the two, and that evidence has been regurgitated to the president. And maybe the president is now moving with speed based on those. One may even want to insinuate and maybe say, maybe allegedly, with no facts in hand, of course, and maybe there's been a breakdown in communication between the provincial commissioner, the national commissioner, the minister of police, and the president. And now, because there's been direct access, all this information is coming to the fore, and the president is then saying, I need to act upon this because I can see that there's something wrong which is taking place. Things are not going according to plan.
Yeah, no, I do want to stay with this issue of the timing and just what the impact of this is going to be long term as we continue to see what some may call a cleanup, right, of the authorities and, you know, the top echelons of law enforcement, especially where prosecutions are concerned. You'd remember Professor Fenter, the redacted comments by the NDPP, Shamila Batohi, when she talked about the infiltration of the National Prosecuting Authority. And again, we need to reiterate that she redacted those comments. But again, they, you know, I wonder if you look at what we're seeing right now with the suspension of Andrew Chauke, if this is some sort of confirmation to the very comments that were made by the NDPP.
Yeah, I think the choice of words, infiltration, was maybe a bad choice, because it's not as if there has been an infiltration. I think if you go back to Zondo Commission and you look at the cases with the affidavits of General Johan Boysen, if you look at what happened with Ndluli, if you look what happened to Dramat, if you see what happened to Sadrak Sibia, then you see that Chauke and the Gauteng NDPP worked in conjunction with several prosecutors surrounding him. So it is as if they were a team. And I think what Ms. Batohi wanted was some lever to break that mold, and that would have been to put Chauke on suspension 2 years ago, but that wasn't given to her. So I think it was more like a group of prosecutors around the NDPP that was kind of ring-fenced, and they continued their work. And I think what my colleague said in his earlier piece was the implication of this is not only political. We can talk about the political implications, but the implication for law and order and the implications for certain cases may be even more far-reaching, in terms of people saying, but whoa, if this man is now part of a problem, then maybe my case wasn't dealt with in the proper way. So there's definitely also implications in law.
Yeah, I wonder, when you do have the sort of concerns that you have around, you know, allegations that are made against a prosecutor, the likes of Andrew Chauke, there is that sense that, well, and you make the point, Prof. Fenter, that, you know, perhaps my case won't get as much attention. But Mpumelelo, help us with this. The challenges that you have when you do have a lack of public trust in the National Prosecuting Authority, even if you may see attempts to clean it up, what it said to the public about whether or not we could see prosecutions of people coming from inside of the NPA itself.
Definitely. And I think if the NPA would sit and say, maybe let's be assessed independently by independent a party or entity, you would find that there are going to be instances in which there'll be faults which are going to be found there. Of course, we do accept we can't have a superhuman NPA with no mistakes. But then you must come back and assess, are those mistakes man-made, mistakes that could have been avoidable, mistakes which are caused by lack of finance, mistake caused by lack of resources, or mistake caused intentionally by individuals who do not want to make sure that they prosecute effectively. Now, it moves back to what the State Capture Commission ought to have done in the first place, in which the new commission seeks to do now. I would have expected then, when the former Chief Justice would have said and listened to all these stories of those investigations not taking place, and I refer to here the asbestos case, for example, to say, wait a minute, in South Africa we have law enforcement agencies and we have the NPA. If these things have not been investigated thus far, And it is now within the commission in which I'm collecting all the evidence which was later being used in all these prosecutions. Why don't I ask the questions? Why is the law enforcement agencies and the NPA not working? Let me call their heads so that they're able to explain to me the type of issues that we have now. So the terms of reference that we have in the proposed commission, which is probably going to take place within the next month or so, are what the State Capture Commission ought to have stated. Now, the results of that are this. You have spent close to R1 billion in terms of resources. If you look at that, there are some municipalities whose total financial year budgets don't even come close to that. You spent 5 years in terms of listening to evidence. And what have you done in all of this? You have simply regurgitated what people have stated and handed that information to the very same law enforcement agencies that the allegations that they're not working efficiently. You're handing the same information in that you have gathered to the NPA, in which is also experiencing problems or allegedly experiencing problems. The results are that you're not going to arrest anyone. You're not going to recover anything. I wish that we'd come back and say, in the assessment of whether the State Capture Commission did its job effectively, let's look at least 5 individuals that have been prosecuted and monies have been recovered to say, at least through the State Capture Commission, we're able to get this type of information. If there are certain pieces of information that you did not receive or certain institutions which were not held accountable, then it means there's a problem. But the second problem is this one. As the person who's in the Ministry of Police and also within the presidency, they shouldn't sleep at night if they do not find mechanisms in order to be able to hold law enforcement accountable and the NPA accountable. In fact, the NPA head, when she appeared in Parliament, it's one of the things maybe she should have highlighted to say, you know, I've spoken with your colleague who's leading cabinet and I've stated to him that I have this type of issues. However, they have not been addressed. So if you need to assess my performance, as the head of the NPA, also think of all the initiatives that I've engaged in, and it's with these impediments which are stopping me from performing optimally.
Yeah, you know, I want to take calls and we're going to keep looking at this because we can certainly look at it from so many angles. Look at the amount of work that we've seen done today by the SAPS, right? The matter of the 5 suspects appearing in the Alexandra Magistrates Court linked to the death of DJ Sambodi and the attempted murder of South African star Tebogo Tobejani. And then, of course, the issue of Kenny Kunene found in the home of one of these suspects by police. What that says to us, we'll get into that in a moment. But let's hear from Sanele in the Ladysmith. Sanele, good evening. Thank you so much for calling in.
Hey,
Siyabonga, thank you for calling. Kumanat.
No, actually, you know, let me critique your expert team there on that other side. You know, the legal expert has just read my mind. I do agree with the legal expert. He is deliberating that so quite well because the main issue is why after the Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi and why now? Especially to the head of the NPA, because the head of NPA, he knew about all these developments, but he kept quiet, although he had the evidence that whatever that was supposed to be issued by then in terms of suspending the prosecutory head of Johannesburg was not done. But how are we gonna trust these bodies, the NPP and the NPA? Including our commissioners, particularly if you can read on these 5 that were apprehended, including our criminal. Where are we as a country?
Yeah, Sanele, we appreciate that. Thank you so much. You know, I think that South Africans are really quite invested in the story because we certainly want to be able to trust our authorities. Coming back to you, Prof. Venter, the issue of the political killings task team, for instance, right? You've got the SAPS talking about how this task team have brought forward 2 cases now that we've seen playing out, that of the suspects in the murder of DJ Sambodi, as well as those of in the attempted murder of Tebogo Tobejani. Now, I don't want to make the assumption that all of these things are linked because I do think that that is incredibly irresponsible, but it certainly does stand out that we're talking about the workings of the political killings task team in Gauteng here that is being talked about. Prof.
Yeah, and the interesting, I want to make 2 points just at the beginning. The one is the task team operated from KZN, but most of his work was done in Gauteng. So there's clearly a link between Johannesburg on the one hand and KZN on the other. And we know it's the N3, it's almost a crime channel, if you want to call it that. And I think what Makwenazi indicated was, I cannot do my work because politicians are influencing some decisions. That was the innuendo that he created in his press conference with his camouflage clothes and everything. And I want to take my answer back to 2007. In 2007, when the Scorpions were killed at the ANC conference and it was replaced by the Hawks, the one big difference was the Scorpions did not report to a minister. In other words, it did not report to cabinet, it reported directly to the head of state. The Hawks was changed, and they now reported to a minister, which from the beginning, it said that the Scorpions, or that portion of the police, should be ring-fenced from political influence. Well, that was broken in 2007. And I think a lot of the problems, and you've mentioned 1 or 2 cases, but it is clear from Makwenazi's presentation that in some cases there were influence either on the NPA or the NDPP. I'm not sure at what level that will be investigated, but I think there is definitely indications of political influence in decisions that lawyers should take, in decisions that detectives should make, and not politicians.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about what we do next, right? Because the work needs to continue. You can certainly remove individuals from the NPA leading the National Prosecuting Authority in Gauteng, suspend them. Who do you place in that position long term, of course, that being the bigger question? We'll get to that on the other side of this. Stay with us. Welcome back. So we continue with our panel discussion, where, of course, we are reacting to the president's suspending of the South Gauteng head of the NPA, Advocate Andrew Chauke, with our analysts, and taking your WhatsApps as well on 0721105584. In fact, let's take a look at some of those texts now. Anonymous sends one that says the whole bunch of these so-called prosecutors, especially in Gauteng and National Office, are all compromised. Andrew Chauke and Gideon Ngwana being the worst of the worst. TT says it's a sign of a decisive action against criminal corrupt elements. They should all be scared. TT, thanks for sending that. Thompson Valoy says it's wrong for NPA to collide. I'm guessing that means collude with the criminals. So the suspension of senior in the judiciary is good to clean up the system. Okay, Thompson, thank you for that. John says, good evening. The fact that the president was sitting on this for 2 years only shows us that the president is just as corrupt and sits at the head. Okay, big ones there, John. Thanks so much for that, though, nonetheless. Moses says, no surprises when politicians and the justice system agents get caught with their pants down. The average politician or legal person chose their career as a second option, the main objective being money. Expect the president to suspend or fire more people before he fires himself. All right, let's talk about what we do to stabilize things. Theo, I see you laughing there. You've got some very colorful words coming from our viewers. In fact, Mpumelelo, perhaps you take this one. What we do next to stabilize things for the NPA in Gauteng?
I think first it helps to start by looking at the law enforcement agencies and also the NPA. If you look at our constitution, section 206, if I'm not mistaken, places very huge political responsibility to a political individual when it comes to the ministry. Now, you can't do that. Reason being, a person who's appointed politically will not necessarily be a career politician and may not know what the career politicians are actually looking for. So if you then issue out political directives or directives in which they need to work in, that's when you're going to have a problem, because they're going to issue out directives which are not in line with what they're looking for, which inherently may end up disbanding task teams which may have assisted. When it comes to the NPA, unfortunately, that falls within the realm of the president. He's supposed to sit down and say, let me sit down with you and the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Development and the NPA head. We are all independent individuals. Let me hear what your concerns are. Let us check your performance in terms of how you ought to perform. Are you finding any impediments that are there? I'm going to go a step further. Let me open the door for you if there are anonymous reports that you would like to deal with. If there are any things that I've also received on my side so that I can be able to act upon it. But most importantly, do not sit on a request or a recommendation which is made by the person that reports to you, a person who presides over a very important area, which is the prosecutorial authority, for 2 years before you act on it when they say to you, I need this individual to be investigated or I need this individual to be gone because I can see that the impediments that are being caused. If you then sit on that, then I think also your performance as the president must also be assessed to say, are you really understanding your role and the importance of your office when it comes to these type of matters?
Yeah. Prof, the continued cleanup, what do we do?
Yeah, well, you see, what Makwenazi, and I go back to that press conference every time, what Makwenazi did, he created a sense of urgency. And very often, if you want political action, if you want a change, if you want things to move, the first thing to do is to create urgency. And very often, it's the lack of urgency that keeps politicians from making very important decisions. And while we're in the season of a national dialogue that will happen sometime in August, I think what Lucky Makwenazi did, he created for us the environment in which a cleanup of the criminal justice system can now take place because we've got the urgency. And I think that commission that we've referred to under the Deputy Acting Chief Justice is very urgent. I think there's a need for their mandate to be published in the government gazettes and so on, and I hope that takes place very early on. What the president already did was to appoint an acting minister of police. He took out the minister of police, placed him on suspension, and I would not be surprised if the same happens to the National Commissioner of Police, because if you really want to drill down in a problem, you must take the role players out so that you can do your work objectively and you can prevent those people from interfering overtly with the people working. So in that, I think, is the way to go forward, because this is all about the integrity of our criminal justice system.
Yeah. I'd want to take one last caller before I let you gentlemen go, in case they have something for you to respond to. We've got Zama in Pietermaritzburg. Zama, good evening. Thank you so much for calling.
Hey, Sissy, how are you?
I'm well, ma'am. Thank you for calling. Talk to us.
I'm good. Can I speak isiZulu?
You may. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll just wish uPresident wethu anga-acta fast khona ezogcina i-confidence yethu la eSouth Africa, because what is going on is still shocking. I was preferring ukuthi kube ngcono usenzo mkhona ubube emxoshile nje straight.
Okay.
Yabo nje izinto ezenzakalayo ziyathusa. We as a community la eSouth Africa sisathuka.
Okay. All right. No, Sisama, thank you so much for calling, and those points are very clear. We've heard them so many times as well. Zama and Pietermaritzburg saying we would have preferred to see a lot more of the sort of speed from the president, and saying that we also would have preferred to see Senzo Mchunu fired as people live in fear. Gentlemen, I am going to release you, though. Thank you so much for your time. Professor Theo Venter, governance expert, as well as Mpumelelo Zikalala, legal expert. We take a short break. We are back in a moment.